there are things that can be done. There really are things that can be done. And then, you can have an interesting conversation, not now, what if those things don't work? And then you really get to, okay, so then we have to really think. And that's where political theorists and political philosophers come in, and sociologists and moral philosophers. It's tough. And the question that you have to ask yourself at the end of the day is, what is the line beyond which I would not be willing to go in order to save the Jewish state? Would I truck them out? Put them on trucks and send them over? I don't want to answer that question. I don't want you to answer. I don't want to answer it myself. But that's a question that, again, I think is a worthwhile kind of value-clarifying kind of a question to have. But I just want to respond, on the level that you've asked the question, which is an extremely important level. There are a lot of things we can do. And I'll end by saying this. I don't know, somebody's relentless. There's a lot of disadvantages of being at war for 60 years. A lot of them. One of them, and it's not the top 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's up there, is that you never get to think about these issues. Because you're always busy staying alive. And a normal country that didn't have to constantly fend off from some border or another would actually start to ask itself something about why isn't it dealing with these major challenges. Now, by the way, before we blame ourselves, I want to remind you how utterly screwed up the United States let its dependence on oil get before it started to think about it. And how utterly screwed up the United States let the environment get before it started talking about global warming.
Climate change.
Whatever you want to call it. Right? In other words, it's not only Israel that always deals with the urgent over the important. I think major issues in America, which is a country basically at peace, and has never had a war since the Civil War on its own land. It's a country that has also not dealt with major issues facing its future. So while I'm critical of ourselves here because we haven't actually had this conversation, even America hasn't had this conversation about a lot of other important issues. It hasn't. But we have to have that conversation. We have to have a conversation as a society which asks ourselves, why do we want to be in business? Okay? And Corey's question, which is where we're going and ending, what do we have to bring to the national community? I'm not sure we have to bring anything. I think our right to exist is simply because we were created by the United Nations. That's for them. But the question is why I would choose to raise my kids here as opposed to the safe neighborhood in West Los Angeles where they were being happily raised before. That's because I think we can do something here as Jews that we can't do anywhere else. I do believe that Jewish refuge is important. And I do think that there is something unbelievably moving about driving up the Jordan Valley Road, the highway along the Jordan Valley, and having my kid who was then in 5th grade or 6th grade look outside and see a sign that says Gilgal to the left and say to me, is that the same Gilgal that I just read about in the Sefer Shmuel, in the book of Samuel? And have me say, yeah, that's it. Like, you're home. There is something very unbelievable about that. And it is true. I'm going to tell you that I still, after almost a decade living here, I walk down, Emek Rephaim in the middle of the street on a Friday night. You've got to be careful because there are still cars that come. And I think to myself, it's really unbelievable. And I go to Shavua HaSefer, the annual celebration of the Hebrew book, where thousands of kids, I said to my 17-year-old son this year, and it happened about 2 months ago, Em and I are going to the book fair. You want to come? He's like, no. Right? And then I said, okay. And then 5 minutes later, I see him on the cell phone, a bunch of people. I said to the front of him, he goes, can we get a ride with you? I said, well, who's me? Who's we? He says, me and 2 friends. I said, yeah, where are you going? He goes, to the book fair. I said, well, but you weren't going to the book fair. He goes, I'm not going with you. Right? And I thought to myself, when I was 17, I never wanted to go to a book fair. And these kids went and thought it was just unbelievable. He went to a lecture, Tisha B'Av, Erev Tisha B'Av. He went to a big lecture on Emek Rephaim. A woman novelist whose name, I don't remember her name, Yochi something or other, Yochi Brandt or something like that. I came home, he told me what she said. He said, Abba, her Hebrew was so beautiful. Regardless of what she said, it was just gorgeous to listen to it. I think it's something pretty amazing when kids actually appreciate the regeneration of Hebrew. And I don't expect people at Concordia University to be swayed by my son's infatuation with the Hebrew language. I'm just getting some not myself. But I don't think, I want us to be on the cutting edge of high tech, and I want us to be on the cutting edge of medicine, and I want us to try to be a decent and legitimate society. But when it comes to them, we have a right to exist because we have a right to exist, because every other country that was created has a right to exist. And we have to be held to the same standards that every other country is held to, but not any higher. Now comes the conversation between me and you. And I know you, so right? So I know you live here. I know you made a choice to live here. And then I have a choice to go back. And I think that the reason that you should stay, if you decide to stay, and I'm certainly not going to lay a guilt trip on you, it's just not my style. I said what I said about your dean before, potentially. I think people make choices. But if you stay, you ought to stay because you think, here's a chance to build something that the Jews can't build anywhere else. That's not for them. It's for us. It's that what you read, and all throughout Dvarim, which we're reading now, the standards to which we want to hold ourselves, and how you treat the land, and how you treat prisoners, and how you treat this, then I want to actually have a place where the Chumash can get actualized. I want to think that when my son arrests somebody, if God forbid he has to do that in the army, that maybe a pasuk will flash in his head as he's pushing a person against the wall and putting handcuffs on him. That it's not a piece of garbage. It's an enemy, but it's not a nothing. I want that to happen. And I want to think about what do you do with the healthcare that you do develop? Who do you give it to, and how do you make it accessible? And when I, recently had knee surgery on Mount Scopus at Hadassah, and virtually everybody else waiting online was an Arab. Because on Scopus, Hadassah Hospital is very heavily Arab. That's where they live. I felt good about it. I felt good. Thought it's pretty cool. And when my friend, who's an emergency medicine person, told me that during the Intifada, there was a guy who actually was part of the conspiracy. He wasn't the actual bomber, but he had helped bring the bomber, and by accident the thing went up too early, and he got blown up, but not killed. And he was brought to the same hospital as the victims were brought in. And she and her fellow doctors slept on the floor next to his bed, because they knew that if they went to the room next door where they have the cots for the doctors, if he crashed, by the time they got back to his bed, he'd be dead. So she, for 3 nights, slept on the floor next to his bed till he was out of imminent danger. I have mixed feelings about that. But I'd like to have those mixed feelings. I think that Judaism at its best is about having mixed feelings. I think it's about being conflicted. I think that's why the great work of Jewish life, the Talmud, is a 20-volume argument. And that's why people objected to the Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. They said that you guys who just give us the halacha, you're ruining what Judaism's all about. It's about, you maintain even the views that lose because you don't believe at the end of the day that all of the wisdom and all of the justice on the side that wins the legal argument. I think that's what we're about. I know we're far way away from that in this country. And I like waking up in the morning, we have what to work for. And because you guys are participants in this by virtue of who you are and what you do, we're in this together. So let's get out there, let's roll up our sleeves. And when we get together in 20 years, let's look at the progress we've made. Have a good night.
Wanted to thank Dr. Gordis for a very resounding lecture. At some point, we'd love to hear from you at a later point about how the Mandel Institute is going to fix our leadership situation in the state of Israel, which I guess is time for a much longer lecture.
Or shorter.
Or shorter. I just wanted to invite you, first of all, personally, on the 29th, on Sunday the 29th, we're presenting, the fellows here are going to be presenting their projects to an audience at the Weitzman Room at 7 p.m. at the Jewish Agency.
Okay.
You have here really people...
downtown.
Right here, in King Joe and Kakab.
Okay.
So 7 to 9, we'll send you the invite. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful night.
You guys have my email address, so if anybody wants to be in touch, just get it from them, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.